My name is Ben Arthur. I'm the creator and host of Songwriter, a podcast that turns stories into songs. It features Questlove and Joyce Carol Oates and David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, Susan Orlean, Steve Earle, and Roxane Gay. And the premise is essentially that all art responds to and is inspired by other art, and Songwriter kind of curates that process. And today we've curated something really extraordinary for you. It starts, well, it doesn't start with, but it includes a brand new song by activist and musician MILCK, written in response to a story on the subject of forgiveness, a conversation with Dr. Suzanne Freedman on the emotional mechanics behind and the science of forgiveness. And to start all of this off, a letter from the beloved and celebrated Dear Sugar column by the best-selling author of Wild and Tiny Beautiful Things, a woman who is the emotional support spirit animal icon queen to me and so many of my favorite people, Cheryl Strayed. Cheryl.
Hi, Ben. Wow. I love, thank you. What a wonderful introduction. I'm so thrilled to be here with you on this panel and with all of you out there today joining this conference.
Truly. What you're sharing today is a very personal letter from a reader of Dear Sugar, and then your response giving them counsel. The piece is very specifically about forgiveness, but it seems to me, reading your work, that forgiveness is at the heart of a lot of the letters to Dear Sugar. Forgiveness of others, but often, as within this story, forgiveness of self. Why do people need so much help understanding forgiveness?
Well, Suzanne's going to help us more with that later, but what I can tell you in my work as Dear Sugar, now for more than a decade, giving people advice in my column, but also really in my life as I have sought to evolve and be a better person. And obviously being a writer, there's no way to write about the human condition without writing about the ways that we have been wounded or harmed or offended, or the ways that we have wounded or harmed or offended others. Of course, forgiveness can be a very light thing. You say something that a joke that somebody takes the wrong way, and you have to say sorry. Or sometimes it's a much deeper and more complicated thing that takes years to reckon with. And I think that the reason it's at the heart of so many of the things we do, because we're constantly bumping up against each other. And, there's no way to live this life we often hear without suffering, without joy, without beauty, without loss. It's also true that there's no way to live this life without reckoning with forgiveness on both sides of the equation.
You've written in many places, including both in Tiny Beautiful Things and Wild, about parts of your own life story that required healing and self-forgiveness. I think here especially of your gorgeous and heartbreaking story of the little red coat that your mother bought for your future children a few months before her death. How did these experiences shape your understanding of self, your understanding of shame, and how did you find the path to forgiveness?
Well, I think, I've always been somebody who paid really close attention to emotional realities. I was always most interested in others, like what was happening beneath the surface, and also really open to excavating my own stuff. And so just one example of forgiveness in my life, I grew up with an abusive father who left my life when he was 6, but he harmed me before that age and then abandoned me after that age. And really, it's taken me decades to get to that place of forgiving him. And many, many things have helped me along the way. But I have to say that one of them was myself harming somebody else. I was married young. I cheated on my first husband. I said sorry. And then over many years, I realized I had made amends with him. I had apologized to him about harming him. But what I realized is I had to forgive myself, because the person who I had really violated in committing that infidelity was me. I had acted against my own values, against my own code. And having to do that actually helped me forgive my father. Because what I had to do when I forgave myself for lying and deceiving somebody I loved is I had to see that I had been doing the best I could, and I didn't do a good job. I didn't live up to my own values, and it opened the door for me to think about maybe my father had done that as well. You know, maybe my father had actually loved me as well as he could. Now, that doesn't make anything that he did justifiable or excusable, but it brought me to a place of understanding. And I think so much of forgiveness is about that. One of the mistakes we make, I think, is we're like, oh, we're letting people off the hook, but no, you're actually more deeply granting them and yourself your complicated, messy, beautiful humanity.
Beautiful. The piece you're reading today is called The Bad Things You Did. Is there anything the audience should know before you read it?
Just if you're not familiar with my Dear Sugar column, it's collected in this book, Tiny Beautiful Things. And these are real letters from real people who write to me. I still do the column. I have a monthly Substack column that I do. And I answer these letters with stories usually from my own life. I will say, as somebody who has written very honestly about, well, I just brought up the topic of infidelity, didn't I? About things that people would probably think they'd be ashamed of: sex, drugs, rock and roll, all that stuff. Writing this letter was actually one of the scariest things I've ever done as a writer, because I realized I did have a deep sense of shame about this particular story. So I'll read it to you, okay?
Please.
It takes about 8 minutes to read. Dear Sugar, for many years, to varying degrees, I stole compulsively. For many of the years I stole, I was on a cocktail of psychotropic drugs for depression, anxiety, and insomnia. In retrospect, I think the drugs made me powerless to fight against the compulsion to take things. An impulse would arise in my head, say, to take this pair of jeans from a friend, that book from that friend, or the abandoned flower pots that sat on the porch of an empty house. I even once took money out of the wallet of my future mother-in-law. When the ideas arose to take whatever it was, I would try to talk myself out of it, but I couldn't stop myself ultimately. I don't do it anymore. I've been off all the meds for about 6 years, and I'm able to control the impulse, which in fact, I rarely have now. I can't totally blame the meds, because before I was taking them, I also had the impulse to steal, and did on occasion succumb to it. I blame myself, I think, because of my complicated psychology, my abusive childhood, my mother screaming at me from time immemorial that I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I was not only trying to fulfill my mother's prophecy, but maybe trying to get people to hate and reject me for taking from them, for being a liar and a thief. I have also compulsively told whopping lies to people, over-the-top stories. They seem to just come out. I loathe myself for these acts. I don't know how to wipe the slate clean. I'm terrified that friends and loved ones who I deceived and stole from, whether they're by taking a material possession or by making up a story, will find out what I did. I am not that person anymore, and I haven't been for years. My greatest wish is to be able to forgive myself, to stop hating myself for these betrayals. I've tried to forgive myself for a long while, but I'm finding I'm no closer to it. I read a lot about this topic, and I'm back in therapy after years of being out of it, but I still hate myself for what I've done. I know I will not take from anyone again in any way. Is that enough? Do I have to admit to those I stole from that I did? Or can I forgive myself without admitting to people how I wronged them? I know they would reject me if I were to admit what I'd done, even though I have not been a liar and a thief for a long, long time. I am so sorry for what I've done, and I would give anything not to have done what I have. Please help, Sugar. I'm tortured. Signed, Desperate. Dear Desperate, 15 years ago, I had a yard sale. I just moved to the city where I now live, and I was literally down to my last 20 cents. So I put nearly everything I owned out on the lawn: my thrift store dresses and books, my bracelets and knickknacks, my dishes and shoes. Customers came and went throughout the day, but my primary companions were a group of pre-adolescent neighborhood boys who flitted in and out looking at my things, inquiring about how much this and that cost, though they neither had the money to purchase nor an inclination to possess the boring non-boy items I had to sell. Late in the afternoon, one of the boys told me that another of the boys had stolen something from me, an empty retro leather camera case that I'd once used as a purse. It was a small thing, a barely worth bothering about item that would have sold for something like $5. But still, I asked the accused boy if he'd taken it. No, he yelled and stormed off. The next day, he returned wearing a big gray hoodie. He lurked near the table where I'd set my things to sell. And when he believed I wasn't looking, he pulled the camera case from beneath his jacket and placed it where it had been sitting the day before. Your thing is back, he said to me nonchalantly a while later, pointing to the camera case as if he'd played no part in its reappearance. Good, I said. Why did you steal it? I asked, but again, he denied that he had. It was a sunny fall day. A few of the boys sat with me on the porch steps, telling me bits about their lives. The boy who'd stolen my camera case pulled up his sleeve and flexed his arm so he could show me his biceps. He insisted in a tone more belligerent than any of the others that the cluster of shiny chains he wore around his neck were real gold. Why'd you steal my camera case? I asked again after a while, but he again denied that he had, though he altered his story this time to explain that he'd only taken it temporarily because he was going to his house to get his money, and then he'd opted not to purchase it after all. We talked some more about other things, and soon it was just the two of us. He told me about the mother he rarely saw and his much older siblings, about what kind of hot car he was going to buy the instant he turned 16. Why did you steal my camera case? I asked once more, and this time he didn't deny it. Instead, he looked down at the ground and said very quietly but very clearly, because I was lonely. There are only a few times anyone has been as self-aware and nakedly honest as that boy was with me in that moment. When he said what he said, I almost fell off the steps. I've thought about that boy so many times in the last 15 years, perhaps because when he told me what he did about himself, he told me something about myself too. I used to steal things too desperate. I had the inexplicable urge to take what didn't belong to me. I simply could not resist. I took a compact of blue eyeshadow from my great aunt in Philadelphia, a pretty sweater from a school friend, bars of soap and fancy wrappers from near strangers' bathrooms, and a figurine of a white dog with his head askew, among other things. By the time I met the lonely boy at my yard sale, I hadn't stolen for years, but like you, the things I'd taken haunted me. I'd meant no harm, but I had the horrible feeling that I'd caused it. And worse still, the intermittent urge to steal hadn't entirely left me, though I'd kept myself from acting on it since I was 18. I didn't know why I stole those things, and I still can't properly say, though, because I was lonely seems about the rightest thing I've ever heard. I think you were lonely too, Sweet Pea. And lonely isn't a crime. Maybe what happened in those years you were stealing and lying is you had a mother-sized hole to fill inside of you, and you stuffed it with a bunch of things that didn't belong to you and said a lot of things that weren't true, because on some subconscious level, you thought doing so would make the hole disappear, but it didn't. You came to understand that you found a way to begin, and you came to understand that, and you found a way to begin to heal yourself. You need to heal better. Forgiveness is the next step, as you so acutely know. I don't think your path to wholeness is walking backward on the trail. The people you stole from don't need you to fess up. They need you to stop tormenting yourself over all those things you took that don't matter very much anymore. I'm not sure why you haven't been able to do that so far, but I imagine it has something to do with the story you've told yourself about yourself. The narratives we create in order to justify our actions and choices become in so many ways who we are. They are the things we say back to ourselves to explain our complicated lives. Perhaps the reason you've not yet been able to forgive yourself is that you're still invested in your self-loathing. Perhaps not forgiving yourself is the flip side of your steal this now cycle. Would you be a better or worse person if you forgave yourself for the bad things you did? If you perpetually condemn yourself for being a liar and a thief, does that make you good? I don't like the thief part of my narrative either. I struggled mightily with whether or not I should write about it here. It's the first time I've written about it, ever. I've written about all sorts of bad things I've done, promiscuous sex, drugs, but this seems worse because unlike those other things, telling you that I used to steal things doesn't jibe with the person I want you to perceive me as being. But it is the person I am. And I've forgiven myself for that. Years after I stopped stealing things, I was sitting alone by a river. As I sat looking at the water, I found myself thinking about all the things I'd taken that didn't belong to me. And before I even knew what I was doing, I began picking a blade of grass for each one and then dropping it into the water. I am forgiven, I thought, as I let go of the blade that stood in for the blue eyeshadow. I am forgiven, I thought, for each of those fancy soaps. I am forgiven for the dog figurine and the pretty sweater and so on until I'd let all the bad things I'd done float right on down the river. And I'd said, I am forgiven so many times, it felt like I really was. That doesn't mean I've never grappled with it again. Forgiveness doesn't just sit there like a pretty boy in a bar. Forgiveness is the old fat guy you have to haul up the hill. You have to say, I am forgiven again and again until it becomes the story you believe about yourself, desperate. I hope you will. I don't know whatever became of that lonely boy at my yard sale. I hope he's made right whatever was wrong inside of him. That camera case he stole from me was still sitting on the table when I closed down my sale. You want this? I asked, holding it out to him. He took it from me and smiled. Yours, Sugar.
That was so beautiful. I love hearing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I need to bring into this now. Oh, and I should say, by the way, we hope to have time for a few questions. So those of you who are watching, please drop them in the chat and we will do our best to get to them if we have time, fingers crossed. Right now, though, I need to introduce Dr. Suzanne Freedman, who is a professor of human development in the Educational Psychology Foundations and Leadership Studies Department at the University of Northern Iowa. She was the recipient of the APA Dissertation Award in 1993 for her groundbreaking research on forgiveness and incest survivors. Dr. Freedman has been studying the topic of forgiveness for over 30 years, and her publications focus on the psychology of interpersonal forgiveness and forgiveness education with children, adolescents, and adults. Dr. Freedman is a member of the Discover Forgiveness Scientific Advisory Council for the Templeton World Charity Foundation. Dr. Freedman.
Thank you, Ben. Great to be here.
It's lovely to have you. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Cheryl's piece wrestles with two interrelated kinds of forgiveness that you and I were talking about before, forgiving others and forgiving oneself. How are the mechanisms and the requirements for each of those kinds of forgiveness different?
Great question. When we forgive ourselves, we have to reconcile with ourselves. We have to accept ourselves as a member of the human community. And when we're forgiving another person, although commonly thought as automatically occurring after we forgive, we don't necessarily have to reconcile with the person who hurt us. So a major difference between forgiving ourselves and forgiving another person has to do with reconciliation. So with self-forgiveness, there is automatic reconciliation. We have to accept ourselves. We have to go farther than just decreasing negative feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. We really have to accept ourselves and welcome ourselves back. But there are also a lot of similarities between forgiving ourselves and forgiving another person. In both situations, we have to admit that something hurtful was done. We have to acknowledge our feelings about the hurtful event. In both situations, although we commonly think that we need an apology to forgive another person, we don't need an apology for forgiveness to occur. It does make it easier, but it's not necessary. When we wait for an apology, we are leaving ourselves perhaps trapped until we receive something from the offender, which may never come. And with self-forgiveness, being forgiven by the person that we hurt does maybe make it easier to forgive ourselves, but it's not necessary. So like in the letter, Desperate hasn't confessed about her behavior, but so she doesn't know, she hasn't admitted it, she hasn't received the other people's forgiveness, but she can forgive herself, as Cheryl discussed.
Lovely. That makes a lot of sense. How is research on forgiveness evolving? You mentioned in our conversations previously that self-forgiveness is underrepresented in scholarly work. What are your particular areas of focus, and how are things changing in your research and the broader research world?
Yes, self-forgiveness is the least studied among like forgiving others or receiving forgiveness. And forgiveness, when the field started being researched from a psychological perspective, we really grappled with the definition of forgiveness. What does it mean to forgive? What does it look like when we forgive? So various models of forgiveness have been developed. I use a model that has 20 different steps and 4 different phases. So when people think about forgiveness, they may think it is an easy process or something that happens overnight because maybe that's what they've been told, but forgiveness takes a lot of effort. So we've gone beyond the definition and the model of forgiveness. We are studying forgiveness more recently with different populations in different cultures, looking at how best to help others forgive. There's been a lot of research on the benefits of forgiveness physically, psychologically, emotionally, how forgiveness impacts interpersonal relationships, how it leads to flourishing based on this panel. And one of the questions you asked earlier was, we hear a lot about forgiveness, and most people have reasons to forgive, but why do so many people struggle with forgiveness? And I think it's because we're told to forgive, but no one really discusses what that looks like and how to forgive. So people are told forgive, but they don't know how. And they think it means excusing or condoning or forgetting or automatic reconciliation or putting up with intolerable actions. And forgiveness really is none of those.
Fascinating. I will put forward my own suggestion, which is I love the idea of standing by a river and letting a blade of grass go by. That seems like a really lovely model that Cheryl came on. So yeah, a sort of physicalizing of it. What does the science forgiveness reveal that isn't necessarily obvious or intuitive to someone like me who hasn't read and studied and taught on this in the ways that you have?
That's a great question. I teach a class on interpersonal forgiveness to college students. And one of them, well, a lot of them talk about how they wish they would have received this information when they were younger in elementary school. So more forgiveness education needs to be occurring in the schools to help people know what it means and how to do it. Another thing that the science has shown is that anger is a natural and normal emotion, and it's part of the forgiveness process. A lot of people criticize forgiveness because they don't recognize the role that anger has in the model. And before we can forgive, We have to admit to and recognize our feelings about being hurt. We have to identify the way we were hurt. As Cheryl said earlier, when we forgive, it's not excusing or condoning. We're actually recognizing that we were hurt and that we didn't deserve to be hurt. But we offer, compassion and mercy to the person who hurt us, even though they don't deserve it. So science shows us that it is important to work through our feelings of anger in a healthy way. And we see lots of models of, working through anger in unhealthy ways. Revenge. I have students tell me that they hold on to their anger until they explode. They suppress it. Our society doesn't do a good job, I don't think, of validating people's anger. And when I work with students in elementary school, we really talk about that, being able to admit that one's angry and helping kids feel validated for their feelings and not getting stuck in it, like Desperate, the letter writer. She's stuck in that stage. She's not able to move beyond her self-hatred or anger towards herself for actions that she did. And just that forgiveness is a process and it takes time and we have to be patient with ourselves. Like Cheryl talked about, took her years to forgive her father for the abuse. When we're talking about deep hurts, forgiveness is not something that is going to occur in a short period of time.
I love what you're saying about learning this, especially as a young person. I have 2 teenagers, and one of the things that, looking back, your job as a parent is to sort of help them control themselves. But within that, it doesn't seem like there's enough space to say, but actually becoming really mad is fine and is an acceptable path forward, within the framework of being a child. Something that Reddy brought up at the beginning of this that I wanted to ask you about, we've spoken a lot about, through the lens of Cheryl's beautiful story, the individual experience of forgiveness, but group forgiveness is also something I know that you think about a lot. Forgiveness, for example, after a civil war, as in South Africa, didn't have a civil war, but as Reddy said, it was in danger of that. Tell us about what is developing in the research you're seeing and how it relates to, our broader human story.
Yeah, well, group forgiveness is one of the newer concepts in the field of interpersonal forgiveness. And researchers are determining how group forgiveness differs from individual interpersonal forgiveness. Is it just more people forgiving, or is it a different phenomenon? How does group forgiveness occur? How can we talk about community forgiving other communities? What does that look like? Another area is how do we, measure group forgiveness, and what does that look like? So looking at if a group is more willing to forgive, is there less likely to be future conflict? And does that mean if more people showing forgiveness in the group, if a community has more people showing forgiveness compared to a community where less people are forgiving, will the less forgiving community be more likely to have continued violence? So those are the issues that researchers are investigating right now. It's a hot topic, and we need it.
Agreed. Extraordinary. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. We are moving ahead through our time, and I did want to be sure to save plenty of time for a brand new song. And so let me introduce MILCK, aka Connie Lim, is a singer, a songwriter, producer, and an advocate. He's known for co-writing and performing Quiet, the viral sensation, 8 million views over 2 days, that became known as the unofficial anthem of the Women's March. Her single with Atlantic Records, If I Ruled the World, was named Song of the Week by Time magazine in 2020. MILCK was recently placed in the Grammy Museum for her song I Belong. And in addition, MILCK also writes and produces songs for other artists like, I don't know, perhaps you've heard of John Legend and Philippa Sue. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you. I'm very inspired. I'm taking notes throughout the whole session. It's been really, really inspiring.
Oh, wonderful. Cheryl specifically requested you as the songwriter for this project. How did you all get to know each other, and how has Cheryl impacted your life artistically and personally?
I feel like life rewards us when we follow our inner truths, that like quiet little voice that whispers to us. I think I mentioned to you before, Ben, that I actually had a quote of Cheryl Strayed's hanging up in my studio before I had, like, this is maybe 8, 9 years ago, before I was signed, before I had stability in my life. I had the quote about fear that was from Wild, and I remember, like, copying it into my Word document and then printing it out on just like a printer piece of paper, and I taped it to the wall in my studio. And it was about fear. I think I pulled it up right now. It's like, I chose to tell myself a different story from the one women are told. I decided I was safe, I was strong, I was brave. Nothing could vanquish me. Insisting on this story was a form of mind control, but for the most part, it worked. And yeah, I simply did not let myself become afraid. And that was such a revolutionary thought, was that I could control how I perceived my relationship with my fear. And it helped me progress in my writing. And then, in the theme of like self-forgiveness, I started going to therapy and forgiving myself for not having the tools to defend myself from experiences of domestic violence. And in that process, I wrote a song that you mentioned that went viral, kind of reclaiming my sense of survivorship into like thrivership. And then in the journey of Quiet going viral, I was invited to a Zen parenting conference, and Cheryl was there and I was there, and we were each like sharing our art, and then we just became friends from then. And Cheryl's actually changed my life, because then she invited me to Mountain Film to perform. This is in 2019, and that's actually where I met a man who now is like my life partner, because of this invitation that Cheryl invited me to go to this special, really special documentary film festival. So it goes deep, and
It does. And her partner is also a dear friend of mine. When I invited Connie to Mountain Film, which I was the guest director of that year, I wasn't thinking that the two of them would fall in love, but like, it was wonderful that two friends, two totally separate parts of my life, came together. And I'm just, the minute I met Connie at this conference where we both spoke, I just sat in the audience and listened to her talk and sing. And I was blown away by how beautiful her voice is and how beautiful her heart is. And I just knew she had to be my friend. So we made it happen.
Beautiful. I have my corner of my eye on my clock, and I want to be sure to have plenty of time to react to your song, Connie. So I would say, if you're ready, please play for us a brand new song. And let me say to the audience who's watching this, Connie's song didn't exist just, I think, 2 weeks ago. This was thrown at Connie, and she very bravely accepted this challenge, wrote this song, and is playing it for the first time in the world's history for an audience. So please give her all of the remote internet support and love as we hear this unveiling. Connie, please.
thank you, Ben. All right, this song is called I'm All Right, You're All Right. I don't need an eye for an eye. I got no need for a world gone blind. The cross you bear
'cause I'm headed for freedom. I'm headed for the truth. I'm headed for freedom. So I'm releasing you. I'm alright, I'm alright, I'm alright, I'm alright. You're alright. We're gonna be alright. The past can echo and fill the room. Open the windows, let the wind blow through. This is a new day that won't revolve around you, 'cause I'm headed for freedom. I'm headed for the truth. The only way to freedom is releasing you. I'm alright, you're alright, I'm alright, you're alright, I'm alright, we're gonna be alright, child. We're gonna be alright, child. Don't got no high horse, I see me in you. I don't got no high horse, I get lonely too. I'm headed for freedom, and may you get there too. May you get there too. May you get there too. May you get there too.
That was so gorgeous. Thank you so much. That was lovely.
Tears in
Again,
my eyes.
yeah, again, just an amazing thing that this didn't exist just a few days ago. Cheryl, what did that make you think and feel?
Well, I really can't listen to Milk to her music without always just tearing up. It's so beautiful, both the words and the sound. And Milk, I'm so honored that my column and your song live together here. So thank you for sharing that beauty with us.
Thank you. This is like the coolest assignment. So thank you for everyone putting this together. And Cheryl, it's a gift. It's because your work has impacted me and the world. And it was so fun to do this assignment because it's really hard because forgiveness is such a big topic, you know? So this song actually did kick my butt.
You represent it so well. You really do.
Dr. Freedman, go ahead.
Process. Oh, thank you, Dr.
I just think it's so beautiful, and I really appreciate how well you represent forgiveness, because there is so many misconceptions about what it is and what it isn't, and just that, you know, the freedom that comes from forgiveness, the release, that, you know, the past can echo, how the past and holding on to anger can really take a toll. And for a while it's empowering, but then it gets old and you're ready to open the windows and let that go. And especially, I love your line, don't got no high horse, I see me in you. And that kind of, that Cheryl talked about, recognizing that everybody's imperfect. We're all members of the human community. We all make mistakes, and I've needed forgiveness in the past, and it helps you recognize the similarity you have to the offender, and it's just beautiful. I loved it.
Lovely.
And I feel like there's no mistake that your last name is Freedman as well.
Oh, yeah, that's fun. And one other thing that, you know, one of the things that people don't often recognize with forgiveness is I'm a runner, and I can go out running and I could feel better. If I'm angry, running makes me feel better. The endorphins kick in. But with forgiveness, it's not just a self-help strategy. We do sometimes choose to forgive because we want to heal and feel better. But during the process, we do think about the other person who hurt us. We do decrease our negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Sometimes we increase positive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Maybe we get back together, maybe we don't. That's dependent upon the offender. Maybe we just wish them well. Okay, but it does include changes in the way we think about the person who hurt us. And you represent that by saying, I'm headed for freedom, and may you get there too. And I think that's really significant. I just love this song.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. It means a lot.
Lovely.
Beautiful.
So we are over time, but we've been given grace to just take it just a few seconds more. And I did want to get one question from the audience. Any of you all can jump in for just a quick response to, I wonder if inability to forgive has something to do with stubbornness and ego. What do you all think?
I think it can. I was just helping my daughter with an assignment about religious freedom. And I read a quote in my forgiveness article they had previously written about how we hold on to anger because it becomes part of our identity. And we're not sure who we will be if we give up this anger. What does that mean? Who are we if we begin to let in understanding, compassion, empathy towards a person who hurt us? So I do think it could be stubbornness. I do think it could be ego, but I also think it could be fear and misconceptions about what forgiveness is and isn't.
Lovely. Cheryl, last word before we do our thanks.
Yeah, my response to that too is just to say, ultimately, I think at root that's, when you have that sense of ego or pride or stubbornness, you're often afraid of being vulnerable. And vulnerability is required for any kind of emotional, psychological, spiritual evolution. And certainly it's at the heart of forgiveness. And I just want to say thank you all of you on this panel for bringing your beautiful vulnerability to this discussion. And MILCK, thank you for opening our hearts with your song. Suzanne, thank you for opening our minds with that lovely proposal that we have better forgiveness education. And Ben, thank you so much for bringing us together in this moving conversation.
I couldn't have said it better. Thank you to the Templeton World Charity Foundation, especially Karen Summer-Shalit, Mahira Tiwana, and Caitlin Randall. Thank you to the artists. And I should say you can listen to MILCK, MILCK, anywhere music streams, can buy Cheryl's books anywhere books are sold. And you can listen to this episode and many others where podcasts pod and at songwriterpodcast.com.